Distinguished colleagues on this panel, the architect of the Conclave for 8 years in a row, Upendra Padi, very senior colleagues and professors who have seen through the development growth of the discipline, my young research scholars who have made an effort to prepare and come and present their thoughts to this conclave. The formulation of this particular session was premised on two aspects. One A is the academic continuity, academic orientation, and academic discourse of artificial intelligence, particularly in the higher education sector. When we say academic discourse and continuity, we have to recognize that artificial intelligence is a dynamic aspect of the growth of society, which very often prides itself in talking about revolutions, path-breaking developments, etc. It is in this context that we have to recognize the inevitable and almost natural, as many people would argue, the growth and pace of technology that, whether we like it or not, is unstoppable. But academics is also about larger frameworks of society. It's about people like you and me. And the contexts are not uniform across the world. There is no notion of homogeneity in societies. In fact, post social media, although many celebrate the immense potential of networking, what has in fact also happened is a lot of territorial echo chambers and articulation of particular points of view have become rampant, the consequences of which are recognized. So when we talk about artificial intelligence from a social science and humanities perspective, whereas our distinguished colleagues in the technology stream, schools of technology, computer science, etc., are naturally challenged in the paradigm of their disciplines to develop and respond to what they think are the appropriate processes in which they need to intervene. Social sciences and humanities, and the moderator justifiably added journalism and media as well, which in fact was at the focus, and it so happens that the panel this morning is of people associated with the discipline for many long years. Now, people talk about disruption, people talk about continuity, people talk about change. Human beings not only evolve, they grow and they change. Is there something fascinating about artificial intelligence? One can be euphoric, one can be pessimistic, one can be cynical, and one can be critical. Euphoria is the general push that it be absorbed in all institutions straight away, and the faster we do it, the faster we'll catch up with each other. That's euphoria. Optimism is wait, let us see. Society is not structured the way we think it is. It has iniquities, it has concerns. We have always talked about, in the context of information rich, we have talked about the information rich, the information poor. And many a time we often think that they are just academic slogans. They are not. They are deep-rooted in terms of very strong analytical frameworks. So optimism is more about whether we can contend, should we contend with it, or is it inevitable? Pessimism, of course, translates itself from the technological school of what we call as the utopia, dystopia, and the contingency perspectives. You also have very strong philosophical positions of anything to do with technology. Critical discourses is a reflection of the human mind as to what does it all do, where does it go. Simple things like, does it help in cognition? Does it help in intelligence? Does it go back to intelligence quotient? These are critical questions that are being raised. Now, when we talk about academic institutions in the Indian context, we may not be able to generalize more than 1,500 universities. But academic institutions have a lot of challenges because they continuously cater to more people, like many in the audience here often talked about as the digital natives, unlike people like us who have got used to the technology and adapted it to our tasks. Academic institutions had, in India, by default, adapted to the COVID pandemic. The whole context of higher education, learning, and not necessarily intelligence became a challenging enterprise for academic institutions. Academic institutions are just not about leadership, programs, USPs, rankings, etc., which is the buzz of the day. Academic institutions are also about how are we translating our students into good human beings in the context in which we live. It's not always about, we are not generating robots. I have no problem with robotics, but we are not generating robots. We are generating thinking individuals. Yesterday, even the front-ranking leaders of industry mentioned that processing and aggregation is different from critical thinking. And academic institutions, when we say critical thinking, we need to look at our structures. Need to look at our governance system. We need to look at our distribution of resources. And even within academic institution, the pedagogy of learning, the pedagogy of resources. When knowledge societies came about in a big way, libraries in Indian institutions were challenged because the knowledge was aggregated as databases and which became a commercial enterprise. You and I could not anymore have access to many of the hard copy journals. We had to pay per journal article, pay per issue, pay per exposure. So what then happened to the opening remark I made about democratization of knowledge? Democratization of knowledge is a theoretical prospect because of technology and intervention. But does it happen? Not necessarily, yes. Today, artificial intelligence also is poised for a revenue model orientation and not a societal model orientation. After 2 queries, the engine says, stop it, migrate to a paid model. So that is the kind of situation we are in. So what do I do with artificial intelligence in terms of pedagogy? The moderator introduced journalism and mass communication. We had a challenge in journalism and mass communication even in the online. How do I teach practical? Then many institutions took the advantage of the demystification notion of technology, handheld devices, and whether we can do something in terms of the students narrating their own stories and how journalism and the criticality of content production could be introduced. We did that. Today, in a classroom, few of us are, at my, I don't want to kind of flash my age with my Aadhaar card, but you will notice that I'm quite old at that. But I am also confronted with the task of going into 4 times a week, I need to go into a class for 90 minutes. And 90 minutes of students with very less attention span. It is not their fault. Their attention span is affected by the ecosystem in which they live. How do I do it? How do I use artificial intelligence? Before I utter a word, the student would have Googled and found out complete about the concept that I'm teaching. No harm. Because earlier we had books. We used to refer to books, and the only question was Indian library system had only 1 book for the lecturer and no book for the students. We have gone through that stage as well. So whatever is held dearly by me was knowledge that was to me, and I could disseminate it in class. Has artificial intelligence changed that? To my mind, it has changed. It's not aggregation. It is the logic and the inquiry that the student has. So, youngsters, it is not the data that is stored in the huge machines. It is the kind of questions that you ask. Education and learning is all about what is the question that I ask, and to that there will be an answer. The criticality comes not so much in the copy and the generation of data. The criticality comes in interpretation of data to make a meaningful picture. So we have a lot of challenges, and I'm sure that my colleagues who have spent long years in the profession, Archana is there, Suresh is there, Pradeep is there, all of them have confronted with challenges. Suresh, for example, had to lead 2 universities which had a different kind of language, which challenge. The Basin presentation yesterday talked about languages. He had to develop multiple programs with a particular medium of instruction. And there is a bias of knowledge system also. If the bias of the knowledge system is entirely in the medium of instruction we have inherited, that is English, Indian languages suffer. So where is knowledge? Where is intelligence? Where is information? And where does it reside in the large repository of Indian languages is a very big challenge. Maybe artificial intelligence might come up with solutions to address this differential and disparate levels of educational institutions in our country. I am very optimistic, although I write in terms of a critical and a very philosophical way on technologies, etc. I am optimistic because in the past 2 or 3 years, I have realized that there are certain inherent advantages in AI. For example, synoptic assessment of documents, synoptic comparison of academic literature, scoping kind of work, all is possible extensively in AI. What happens is the time that you would spend in scoping, you can spend more time in interpretation. Every layer of data has an advantage that we can. So researchers need not despair what will happen to their jobs, etc. As long as there is a thinking mind, machines cannot take over. It is the thinking mind that monetizes knowledge, that monetizes information. The IT sector is not run by machine. Infosys could have a huge machine and run its business. No. There are layers of people, youngsters like you, working for these companies. And what do you bring to the table? You bring to your table your context, your experience, your learning, your cognition, and your abilities. Have hope that this is part of a continuum of changes in the society. It is revolutionary, if you say so, but it cannot be disruptive. It can be disruptive in the interim, like transitional period where we don't have the skills, we lose jobs. Many people have said this. But today, I'm very hopeful because in LKG onwards, people are getting into this notion of ecosystem. From the child who looks after from the mother who looks after the child and gives the cell phone when it is crying, to a kindergarten teacher who also uses YouTube and comics in classes to disrupt, we have seen come a long way, and there's a longer way to go. Archana saying, no, I divided the speakers into three plausible scenarios. Archana focused on what it is and what are the possibilities and what are the limitations and how it can be used and what is its application in research. Pradeep was practical in trying to tell us how it can be incorporated in pedagogy, and also drew from his experience in terms of the Google initiative and clearly demarcated the difference between aggregation, analytical, and the tool of AI in the present context. Suresh was both philosophical, practical, and critical. He harped upon the fundamental question where and whether and whither journalism in the AI era. He also asked a more recurrent question that we have been asking: is there representation in the present context possible? Which is a very valid observation because it can analyze and be logical from the huge database it has. What happened was when big data came into the picture, big data needed an application. Let us also understand the industrial and economic imperative of AI. Big data aggregation was an important phase when data got aggregation to such an extent that they needed to have a tool for its monetization. That is when they said that big data is fine, but big data analytics is important. And then they said analytics has to have a logic and reasoning, and logic and reasoning are related to intelligence, and therefore we will have artificial intelligence as a driver of modern economy. Some of these things have happened. There is a logic, there is a trajectory in what is happening, but as the three academic colleagues have spoken, they all have recognized that while it's a fascinating tool, no doubt about it, it also raises some of the fundamental questions in a country like India. Always India is both a test case, a paradox, and it represents the magnitude of the problem for any great believer in either technology or non-believer. On that note, I've taken 95 seconds. Thank you very much. That's it.